The theist will say that God exists inexplicably. The atheist will say, why not just stop with the universe? The universe just exists inexplicably. So we seem to reach a stalemate. Well, not so fast. This obvious objection to premise one is based on a misunderstanding of what Leibniz meant by an explanation. In Leibniz's view, there are two kinds of things. A, things that exist necessarily, and B, things which are produced by some external cause. Let me explain. Things which exist necessarily exist by a necessity of their own nature. It's impossible for them not to exist. Many mathematicians think that numbers, sets, and other mathematical objects exist in this way. They're not caused to exist by something else. They just exist by the necessity of their own nature. By contrast, things that are caused to exist by something else don't exist necessarily. They exist because something else has produced them. Familiar physical objects like people, planets, and galaxies belong to this category. So, when Leibniz says that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, that explanation may be found either in the necessity of a thing's own nature or else in some external cause. So, premise one could be revised in the following way. 1 star, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. But now the objection falls to the ground. For the explanation of God's existence lies in the necessity of his own nature. As even the atheist recognizes, it's impossible for God to have a cause. So Leibniz's argument is really an argument for God as a necessary, uncaused being. Far from undermining Leibniz's argument, the atheist's objection to premise one actually helps to clarify and magnify who God is. If God exists, then he is a necessarily existing, uncaused being. So, what reason might be offered for thinking that premise one is true? Well, when you reflect on it, premise one has a sort of self-evidence about it. Imagine that you're walking through the woods and you come upon a translucent ball lying on the forest floor. You would automatically wonder how it came to be there. If one of your hiking partners said to you, "Don't worry about it, it just exists inexplicably," you'd either think that he was crazy or you figured that he just wanted you to keep on moving. No one would take seriously the suggestion that the ball existed there with literally no explanation. Now, suppose you increase the size of the ball in this story so that it's the size of a car. That wouldn't do anything to remove or to satisfy the demand for an explanation. Suppose it were the size of a house. Same problem. Suppose it were the size of a continent or a planet. Same problem. Suppose it were the size of the entire universe. Same problem. Merely increasing the size of the ball does nothing to affect the need of an explanation. Now, sometimes atheists will say that premise one is true of everything in the universe, but is not true of the universe itself. Everything in the universe has an explanation, but the universe itself has no explanation. But this response commits what has aptly been called the taxicab fallacy. As the 19th century atheist philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer quipped, premise one can't be dismissed like a hack once you've arrived at your desired destination. You can't say that everything has an explanation of its existence and then suddenly exempt the universe. It would be arbitrary for the atheist to claim that the universe is the exception to the rule. Recall that Leibniz does not make God an exception to premise 1. Our illustration of the ball in the woods showed that merely increasing the size of the ball, even until it becomes coextensive with the entire universe, does nothing to remove the need for some explanation of its existence. Notice, too, how unscientific this atheist response is. For modern cosmology, the study of the large-scale structure of the universe is devoted to a search for an explanation of the universe's existence. The atheist attitude would cripple science. So, some atheists have tried to justify making the universe an exception to premise 1. They say that it's impossible for the universe to have an explanation of its existence. Why? Well, because the explanation of the universe would have to be some prior state of affairs in which the universe did not yet exist. But that would be nothingness, and nothingness cannot be the explanation of anything. So the universe must just exist inexplicably. This line of reasoning is, however, obviously fallacious, for it just assumes that the universe is all there is, so that if there were no universe, there would be nothing. In other words, the objection assumes that atheism is true. The atheist is thus begging the question, arguing in a circle. Leibniz would agree that the explanation of the universe must be a prior state of affairs in which the universe did not exist. But that state of affairs is God and his will, not nothingness. So, it seems that premise 1 is more plausibly true than false, which is all that we need for a good argument. What then about premise 2? That if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Is it more plausibly true than false? Well, what's really awkward for the atheist at this point is that premise 2 is logically equivalent to the typical atheist response to Leibniz's argument. Two statements are logically equivalent if it's impossible for one to be true and the other to be false. They stand or fall together. So, what does the atheist typically say in response to Leibniz's argument? As we've just seen, the atheist typically asserts something like the following. A, if atheism is true, the universe has no explanation of its existence. This is precisely what the atheist said in response to premise 1. The universe just exists inexplicably. But A is logically equivalent to saying B, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then atheism is not true. A and B are logically equivalent. If atheism is true, the universe has no explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, then atheism is not true. So that A and B are logically equivalent. So you can't affirm A and deny B. But B is virtually synonymous with premise 2, that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. So by saying, in response to premise 1, that given atheism, the universe has no explanation, the atheist is implicitly admitting premise 2, that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then God exists.